There is a treasury so vast that the wealth of empires is but dust beside it, and it is nearer to you than your hands or your feet. This treasury is not hidden in vaults, nor guarded by armies. It is within you. Tonight, I will reveal to you the 7 divine laws by which all money, all gold, all silver flows into the life of the one who dares to claim it. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, saith the Lord of hosts. These words, spoken through the prophet, are not a pronouncement of possession by some distant sovereign who sits apart from you, holding treasure beyond your reach. They are the eternal declaration of the one reality within you, the living I am, that has never been separated from the riches of creation. The one who says these words is not a figure to whom you must petition or from whom you must earn favor. That voice is your own awareness of being, the deep, unchanging self that existed before the world was, and that will remain when all the forms of this age have passed away. When you say, am, you are speaking the name of the Lord, the only possessor of all things. And if the silver and gold are His, and you are one with Him, then they are already yours in truth. But to merely repeat such a verse with the lips, while in the heart feeling lack, is to stand before the treasury of heaven with the key in hand, yet never open the door. The power of these words lies in the recognition of their mystical meaning, that all supply, all wealth, all abundance is a state of consciousness. The gold of heaven is not locked in chests, nor the silver buried in the earth. They exist in the infinite possibilities of the unseen. When you take these words into yourself, you are not to imagine that a God apart from you holds treasure in some far-off place to be given if you are deemed worthy. You are to realize that the consciousness which utters them is your own life, and that to claim the truth of these words is to awaken to your identity as the heir and possessor of the abundance you seek. Imagine, if you will, a man who has inherited a vast estate, but who wanders the fields as though they belong to another. He sees the orchards laden with fruit and thinks, if only the owner would grant me a share. Yet the title deed bears his own name, and the keys to the storehouse hang upon his belt. So it is with many who long for financial freedom, more wealth, more provision. They pray as beggars to the very self that already holds the wealth they desire. They speak to I am as if he were other than themselves. The scripture declares plainly, I and my Father are one. To separate yourself from the Lord of hosts in your imagination is to forfeit, in appearance, that which is already yours in reality. This is why the first act is always recognition. Before you can lay hold upon the gold and silver in your world, you must lay hold upon the truth of your being. You must come to see that consciousness is the only reality, that the visible is but the shadow cast by the invisible state you occupy. If you are conscious of lack, the world will bear witness to that state with barren fields and empty hands. If you are conscious of plenty, the world will, in its own manner and timing, reflect the abundance you have assumed within. The silver and gold do not change hands in the outer world until you have taken possession in the inner. I knew a woman once who lived always with the fear of not having enough. She worked tirelessly, saving every penny, but her heart was never at rest. When she heard the words, the silver is mine and the gold is mine, she dismissed them as poetic and impractical. But one evening, as she sat quietly, she decided to test them. Instead of thinking of her bills and the uncertainty of tomorrow, she began to feel what it would be like to be utterly free from want. She imagined herself standing in a beautiful room, sunlight pouring in, with a sense that all her needs were met. She repeated inwardly, not as a petition but as a fact, the silver is mine and the gold is mine. Something within her shifted. In that moment, she no longer saw herself as one who lacked, but as one who already possessed. Within a week, an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative came into her hands. It was not the verse alone that changed her world, but her acceptance of its truth as describing her own being. You see, the divine declaration is not a promise that someday you may possess. It is a statement of the eternal now, that in this moment, in your true self, you already hold all you could desire. The task is not to create wealth, but to awaken to it. Just as the seed contains the tree in potential, so does your consciousness contain within itself the wealth that will appear in your world. And just as the seed does not strain to become the tree, but simply abides in the state of life that is already its nature, so you must abide in the state of possession until the outer form takes shape. It is written, "Call those things which be not as though they were." This is not the counsel of wishful thinking, but of divine identification. When you say, "I am wealthy," while feeling yourself to be poor, you are not lying. You are calling the invisible into visibility by aligning your consciousness with the truth of your being. The outer facts may at present deny it, but facts change, truth remains. The outer world is but the echo of the inner word. If you persist in the inner recognition that the silver and gold are yours now, the echo will eventually match the voice that gave it. Consider the parable of the prodigal son. He left his father's house, spent all he had, and found himself feeding swine in a foreign land. Yet even there, in his lack, the truth remained. He was still the son of a wealthy father. His poverty was only the result of forgetting who he was. When he came to himself, he remembered the abundance of his father's house and resolved to return. This return was not a journey in miles, but in consciousness. He went back in awareness to the state of sonship, and the outer world responded with robe, ring, and feast. So it is with you. If you have wandered into the far country of lack, the way home is the same. Come to yourself. Remember the words, "The silver is mine, and the gold is mine," and recognize that the speaker is your own I am. There is no limit to the supply, for the source is not the outer world, but the infinite imagination of God, which is your own imagination. When you know this, you cease to fear the fluctuations of markets or the opinions of men. You stop looking to employers, clients, or chance as the cause of your income. You understand that every channel is but an instrument, and the source is within you. This knowledge sets you free to live without anxiety, to give without fear, to receive without guilt. If ever you are tempted to think, "I do not have enough," turn inward and declare with feeling, "The silver is mine, and the gold is mine." Let the truth of these words sink into you until you feel the quiet certainty that they describe your reality. Do not measure this truth by the evidence of the moment. The gold and silver you claim in consciousness will clothe themselves in whatever form best suits your need. It may be money, opportunity, an idea, a meeting with the right person at the right time. Your only task is to claim and feel it within, knowing that the outer will follow as night follows day. There is a rhythm to this inner claiming. It is not a frantic grasping, but a calm, steady dwelling in the awareness of possession. Just as a nobleman walks through his estate without the need to remind himself of his ownership, so you must walk through your days with the quiet dignity of one who knows the silver and gold are his. This is not arrogance, it is alignment with the truth. The arrogant man boasts to convince himself of what he doubts. The one who knows is silent, serene, and sure. Even in the smallest moments, you can practice this recognition. If you see something beautiful, instead of thinking, "I cannot afford it," allow yourself to feel, "That is mine," in consciousness. Not in the sense that you will steal or take what belongs to another, but in the recognition that beauty, abundance, and wealth are part of your inheritance as one with the I am. This feeling, repeated and sustained, will transform the way you see the world and the way the world responds to you. There was once a shopkeeper who, despite steady business, always feared the slow season. Each year, as summer waned, he braced himself for decline. One day, as he read the scripture about the silver and gold, he decided to change his inner posture. Instead of dreading the coming months, he began to imagine his store filled with customers, his shelves emptying, his till overflowing. He walked through his shop each morning feeling as though the abundance was already present. That year, for the first time, the slow season never came. In fact, it became the most profitable period he had ever known. Nothing in the town had changed. What changed was the state from which he lived. So the question is never, how do I get the silver and gold? But, am I willing to accept that they are already mine? This acceptance is not a mere mental statement. It is the deep, emotional knowing that moves you to act and feel as one who possesses. It transforms your posture, your tone of voice, the way you meet others. And because the outer is but a mirror, it must eventually reflect the wealth you have assumed. Every time you affirm, the silver is mine and the gold is mine, you are doing more than speaking words. You are striking a note in the unseen, and the world will answer in harmony. You may not know through whom or through what means the wealth will come, but you do not need to know. The law operates with a precision that does not require your guidance. Your part is to dwell in the state of already having, to walk by the light of the truth that all you seek is already contained within the I am that you are. This is the foundation upon which all other laws rest. Without this recognition, you will forever chase wealth as something apart from you. With it, you cease to chase and begin to attract, for you live in the awareness that the owner of all substance and the awareness you call I are one and the same. And as you hold to this truth, the silver and the gold, in whatever form is needed, will appear in your experience as naturally as the sun rises in the morning. All wealth begins in the invisible. Before any coin is minted, before any banknote is printed, before any fortune is counted in the world of form, it is first conceived and sustained in consciousness. The inner law governing money is unchangeable. You do not attract what you wish for. You attract what you are conscious of being. No man can dwell in the feeling of poverty and find riches on his path, for the law will only deliver to him the harvest of the seed he has sown in thought and feeling. And likewise, no one can truly sustain the consciousness of wealth without that wealth taking shape in his experience. It is as certain as the turning of the earth and the coming of the seasons. This law has been spoken in many tongues and clothed in many symbols. Some have called it sowing and reaping. Others have spoken of it as cause and effect. The mystic calls it creation, for the inner state is the cause, and the outer world is its visible offspring. To dwell in the state of wealth is to accept it as an already accomplished fact within yourself, not something you will one day earn or find, but something you possess now in the unseen realm. The unseen is not imaginary in the sense of unreal. It is the source from which all reality springs. It is the seed ground, and the visible world is but the harvest. You cannot reap corn if you have sown wheat. Likewise, you cannot harvest riches if you have sown lack. This law is exact. It is impartial. It does not bend to pity or favor any man because of his prayers or tears. It works according to the state you occupy. You may cry for wealth all the days of your life, but if you continue to see yourself as one without it, you are declaring to the law that poverty is your state, and the law will never betray its own nature to comfort you. But the moment you assume the feeling of wealth, regardless of appearances, the law must bring into your life the means and conditions by which that wealth is expressed. The inner state always precedes the outer fact. To understand this deeply, you must see that consciousness is the only reality. There is no world apart from the one you are aware of. What you call the world is but the arrangement of your own mind made visible. If you accept this, you will cease to struggle with outer conditions, trying to force them into the shape you desire. You will instead turn inward and shape the only thing that truly matters, the state from which you live. If your inner state is abundance, the outer must mirror abundance. If your inner state is scarcity, the outer cannot help but echo it. I recall a man who longed for a new business venture. He had the skill, the desire, and the plan, but he said, "I cannot begin until I have the capital." He saw the money as separate from himself, something he had to go out and get before his dream could be realized. I told him that capital is not a pile of notes in a vault, it is an inner awareness of supply. If he could assume now the feeling of a man already operating his business successfully, the law would open the channels for the necessary funds. He began to live inwardly as that man. He walked through his days with the quiet assurance of one whose venture was already thriving. Within weeks, an old friend, without knowing his need, offered to invest in him. The funds appeared, the business opened, and it prospered. He had first claimed the state, and the state drew to him the outer means. The inner law is the same for all. If you are seeking to win the lottery, to increase your income, to find unexpected financial blessings, the process does not begin with the outer ticket, the new job, or the windfall. It begins with the state of already having. In imagination, you must feel what it would be like if the desire were already fulfilled. Not as a dream to be reached someday, but as the living fact of this present moment. The feeling is the seed, the fact is the harvest. Many fail because they continue to dwell in the state of wanting, thinking that wanting is enough. But wanting only perpetuates more wanting. It is possession in consciousness that produces possession in fact. Think of a farmer. He does not stand in his field saying, "I want corn," and expect the corn to grow because of his desire alone. He knows the law of sowing. He plants the seed, covers it, and trusts the process. Your inner assumption is the planting of the seed. Your persistence in that assumption is the tending of it, and your faith in the unseen is the protection of it until the harvest comes. If you dig up the seed every day to see whether it is growing, you destroy it. Likewise, if you abandon your inner state every time outer evidence seems contrary, you uproot the very seed you have planted. You must therefore train yourself to think and feel from the place of your fulfilled desire. This is different from thinking of it. To think of wealth is to place it outside yourself, in the future, as something yet to be attained. To think from wealth is to feel yourself already rich, already supplied, already in possession. In the inner world, the assumption is the reality. The outer world is merely its shadow. Do not concern yourself with the how or when. The law knows ways beyond your reasoning. Your part is to remain in the state, for the state itself contains within it all the means necessary for its fulfillment. There is a story of a widow who lived in fear of losing her small home. Debts pressed upon her, and she saw no way out. She was told to dwell in the feeling of already owning her home outright, free from debt. At first, she resisted, saying, "But I cannot ignore these bills." Yet she began, each night before sleep, to imagine herself walking through her home with the lightness of one who owed nothing on it. She would hear friends congratulating her, see the papers marked, "Paid in full," and feel the joy of freedom. Within 3 months, a relative she had not heard from in years sent her a gift large enough to clear her debts entirely. She had lived in the state of ownership, and the law arranged the details. When you hear that all increase of money is governed by the state you occupy, do not think this applies only to the grand desires. It governs every movement of your life. Even the smallest exchanges are shaped by your inner sense of supply. A man conscious of abundance will notice opportunities, ideas, and connections that another, dwelling in lack, will walk past without seeing. The same world lies before them, but they do not inhabit the same state, and so they live in different realities. You may wonder, what if I am surrounded by poverty, by limitation? Remember, the law does not operate by contagion. The outer environment has no power to dictate your state unless you grant it that power. A seed planted in good soil will grow even if the field beside it is barren. The state you occupy is your soil. You can dwell in wealth though your neighbors dwell in lack, and your world will still bear the fruit of your inner choice. Some fear that to dwell in the state of wealth without having it outwardly is to deceive themselves. But you are deceived only when you think the outer world is the cause and the inner world the effect. The truth is the reverse. To live in the assumption of wealth is to align yourself with the source from which all things come. The outer will catch up in its own time. The deception is to let appearances dictate to you what is true. The inner law requires your loyalty. If you waver between states, one day feeling rich, the next day fearing lack, you are like a man planting one seed today, another tomorrow, then digging them both up. The law will bring forth the harvest of whichever state you give your consistent attention to. Choose, therefore, the state you wish to experience and remain in it. It is not effort that produces the result, but sustained awareness. There is a quiet majesty in living from the end. It frees you from the anxious striving that so many mistake for progress. When you know the state you occupy will externalize itself, you can rest inwardly even while outwardly acting. You move through your days as one who already possesses, and that possession begins to reveal itself in form. The doors that seemed closed open. The people you need to meet appear. Ideas come with a clarity that makes action easy. The state contains the way. If ever you feel tempted to measure your progress by the outer world, remember that the seed takes root in darkness before it breaks the surface. The unseen work is as real as the visible result. The state of wealth you now occupy may be quietly reshaping your world in ways you cannot yet see. Trust the law, and it will not fail you. There is nothing partial or limited about this principle. It is as available to you as it has been to any man or woman in history. The same law that raised one from obscurity to riches will work in you. For it is not about who you are in the eyes of men, but who you are in consciousness. And you are free at any moment to choose the state you will occupy. If you choose wealth and remain in it, wealth must be your experience, for the law has no choice but to reflect your inner world in the outer. This is why the wise do not chase money as though it were running ahead of them, but call it to themselves by living from the state of already having. In that state, they know that the channels through which wealth comes are countless, and that none of them are the source. The source is within, and it is inexhaustible. When you live in this way, you discover that wealth is not something you get, but something you are. And once you are it in consciousness, the outer must follow, for the inner and the outer are but two sides of the same reality. Close your eyes and for a moment, let the world outside fade into stillness. The noises, the duties, the demands, let them slip away, for the kingdom you seek is not found in the outer clamor, but in the inner silence. It is there, in that quiet chamber within, that all wealth is born. When I speak of the vision in imagination, I speak of the one and only creative act. Every coin in your pocket, every bill you have ever paid, every possession you have called your own began first as an unseen image. Before it was drawn, it was dreamed. Before it was held, it was felt. Before it was counted, it was claimed in the invisible. Imagination is not a shadowy escape from reality, it is the womb of reality itself. The outer world is only the past made visible, the solidified impressions of the imagination. If you would change the outer, you must first change the inner picture. You cannot improve the harvest by scolding the field. You improve it by planting a new seed. And imagination is the only field in which you may sow. This is why it is written, "Whatsoever things ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them." Prayer is not pleading, it is the assuming in imagination that you already possess what you desire. To create wealth, you must first become wealthy within. You must make the scene of your abundance so vivid in your mind that you feel it as present reality. The sharper, the more real, the more natural this inner scene becomes, the faster it will clothe itself in form. The world outside cannot resist the impression of a mind that knows what it is in possession of. The secret is to think from the desire fulfilled, not of it. Thinking from means you enter the scene in imagination and live it, not as an onlooker watching from a distance, but as a participant in the middle of it. I once spoke to a man who dreamed of financial independence. He worked long hours and told himself, "Someday I will be free." But each night before sleep, he rehearsed the same tired thought of lack, bills to be paid, debts hanging over him. I asked him to change his nightly picture. Instead of seeing his bills, I asked him to imagine sitting at a desk with his accounts laid before him, all marked, paid in full. To hear the crisp sound of paper, to see the ink of finality, to feel the lightness in his chest as he leaned back in his chair, knowing nothing was owed to anyone. At first, he said it felt strange, even dishonest. But he persisted, for the mind will resist what contradicts its habitual state until it is trained to dwell there. In less than 4 months, through means he could not have devised, his debts were cleared entirely. The outer followed the inner picture, as it must. When you enter the secret place of imagination, you must make it real. Feel the weight of the gold in your hand. Smell the leather of the wallet, the ink of a fresh contract, the crispness of newly printed notes. Let the warmth of gratitude rise in you, as though the scene were happening now. The mind responds to vividness. If you make the scene hazy, it will remain a dream. If you make it sensory and immediate, it will become your world. For the mind cannot distinguish between an event vividly imagined and one physically experienced. The impression it accepts is the impression it expresses. There is a woman I knew who lived in a small apartment, longing for a finer home. She had little money and no idea how she could move, but she began to build in imagination the house she desired. Each night, before she drifted into sleep, she would imagine herself turning the key in the door, walking into a sunlit room with polished floors and flowers on the table. She would hear the echo of her steps, smell the fresh paint, and feel the joy of belonging there. She did this until it no longer felt like a wish, but like a memory. Within a year, an opportunity came to rent a house matching her vision exactly, at a price she could easily afford. She stepped into the world she had already lived in for months in imagination. The act of imagining is not idle daydreaming, it is a deliberate choice of the reality you wish to see. It is the shaping of substance. The vision must imply the wish fulfilled. This means you do not simply picture piles of money without context. You imagine the moment that would naturally follow the acquisition of that money. If your desire is to receive a large sum, you might imagine shaking hands with a banker who congratulates you, or reading a letter confirming the deposit, or feeling the weight lifted from your mind as you see your savings increased. The scene should be short, vivid, and repeatable, for the mind works best with concentrated impressions. When the prophets spoke of writing the vision and making it plain, they were speaking of this exact act, to inscribe upon the tablet of your imagination the end you desire, in such detail and with such feeling that it becomes plain to the inner eye. The world outside is but the slow motion mirror of this inner writing. Once it is accepted inwardly, the outer must obey. You may ask, must I imagine every detail of how it will come? No, for that is to interfere with the wisdom of the law. The how is not your concern. You are the sower, not the soil. The soil knows how to bring forth the harvest once the seed is sown. Your only task is to plant the seed, the end scene, and to keep it alive by revisiting it until it takes root. The moment you insist on dictating the means, you move from faith to doubt, for you imply that unless it happens in your way, it cannot happen. The vision works because it rests in the assurance that the end is already accomplished. I knew another man who desired to win a particular contract that would bring him both wealth and prestige. Instead of worrying over the competition, he went each night into his imagination and heard a colleague say, "Congratulations, I knew you'd get it." He felt the handshake, saw the smile, and accepted the scene as true. On the day the decision was announced, it came in exactly the manner he had imagined. The words were almost identical to those in his vision. The law had taken the inner image and found the perfect channel for its expression. Imagination is the only way to truly possess your desire before it appears. Possession in the outer without possession in the inner is fragile and fleeting, but possession in the inner will inevitably call forth possession in the outer, for the two are reflections of one reality. You can test this with small things. Imagine receiving a letter from a friend, hearing from someone you have not seen in years, or finding a small sum of money unexpectedly. Make the inner scene vivid and then drop it. Do not search for it, live in the state of already having. You will find that the outer delivers the shadow of what you have already accepted inwardly. When you construct your vision, let it be natural. Do not imagine something so grandiose that it feels foreign to you. Choose a scene that implies your desire fulfilled and that you can easily step into in imagination. If your desire is wealth, imagine the ordinary actions you would take if you were already wealthy. Paying for something without counting the cost, gifting someone freely, seeing a healthy balance in your account. The more natural the scene, the more readily the mind accepts it, and the sooner it will appear. In the quiet of the night, as you prepare for sleep, the mind is most open to suggestion. This is the perfect time to plant your vision. In that drowsy state between waking and sleeping, the critical faculties fade and the impression sinks deep into the subconscious. This is why it is written, "When you pray, believe that you receive." In this state, belief is not forced, it is felt as reality. You are no longer straining to make it happen, you are resting in the certainty that it is already so. There was a young man who worked for a modest wage but longed to own his own shop. Each night, before sleep, he imagined himself turning the key in the lock of his store, smelling the scent of new wood and fresh stock, hearing the hum of satisfied customers inside. He did this for months, never knowing how it could happen. Then, without seeking it, an older shopkeeper in his town decided to retire and offered to sell him the business on terms he could manage. The vision had prepared the way. Imagination is not only the beginning of wealth, it is the sustainer of it. Many who acquire riches outwardly lose them because they have never truly possessed them inwardly. If the inner picture remains one of scarcity or fear of loss, the outer will eventually reflect it. But when the vision of abundance is sustained inwardly, the outer form, once created, is held secure by the same law that brought it forth. Do not underestimate the quiet power of a few moments spent in vivid imagination each day. These moments are the true labor that brings the harvest. Outward work without inward vision is toil without seed. It may keep you busy, but it cannot produce lasting abundance. Outward action informed by inward vision, however, is like planting in fertile soil. The result is inevitable. When you step into your inner vision, you are not pretending. You are entering the reality that will one day be visible. The unseen is not less real because it is unseen. It is the root, the outer is the fruit. To dwell in imagination is to stand at the source and command the shape of your world. All that remains is to persist in that vision until the day you walk into it with your physical senses, just as you have walked into it 1,000 times before with the senses of the mind. If you would see the world rightly, you must first see yourself rightly. The outer picture, no matter how convincing, is but the shadow of an inner reality. The shadow cannot move independently. It dances only to the movement of the form that casts it. So it is with the facts of life. They have no power in themselves, but arise solely from the state in which you dwell. The state precedes the fact as surely as the seed precedes the fruit. And the seed, though hidden in darkness, carries within itself the pattern of what will appear in the light. Consider the words, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." not merely what he thinks in his mind, but in his heart, in the deep, abiding feeling of himself. The heart is the seat of the state. The state is not a fleeting wish, nor a passing fancy, but a sustained inward position, a dwelling place in consciousness. To dwell in a state is to live and move and have your being in it until it becomes as natural to you as breathing. Then, without effort, the facts of that state arrange themselves in the world of sense. I once knew a man who, in the outer world, was heavily in debt, unemployed, and without a single visible avenue to change his lot. Yet inwardly, each night and each morning, he took his attention away from his empty purse and fixed it upon the feeling of being a man of substance. In imagination, he handled crisp notes, he heard his friends congratulating him on his good fortune, he saw himself signing checks with ease. He persisted in this inner act until the state possessed him more than his visible circumstances did. Within months, a forgotten inheritance was brought to light, and his life's picture changed completely. The fact followed the state just as surely as day follows night. This is not to say that the outer conditions have no seeming weight. They will press upon you with all the authority of fact. But the law is unmoved by appearances. It responds only to the state you occupy. A state is not something you plead for. It is something you accept as real here and now. When you accept it inwardly, though no evidence yet supports it, you have planted the seed. From that moment, the fact is already in motion, though it be unseen. In the parable of the sower, the seed falls upon various grounds. Only the good ground, which receives and holds it, brings forth fruit. The good ground is the mind that receives the assumption and clings to it until it becomes a living state. Rocky ground, where the seed is quickly taken, but just as quickly abandoned at the first sight of contradiction, produces nothing. The thorns of worry and doubt choke the seed before it takes root. But when you let the feeling of the wish fulfilled sink deep into the soil of your being and protect it from the weeds of denial, the harvest is certain. Every great transformation begins invisibly. The caterpillar does not sprout wings in the open air, but in the stillness of the cocoon. The state is your cocoon. Enter it and remain in it, not as one pretending, but as one who knows. Pretense always hopes to be found out, knowing rests in quiet certainty. You cannot produce an outer fact that is not already alive in the inner state. To change the harvest, you must change the seed. To change the seed, you must change the state. I recall a woman who longed for a home of her own. She lived in a small rented room and saw no means of purchasing a house. Yet each night, she walked in imagination through the rooms of her desired home. She felt the smooth banister beneath her hand. She gazed from the imagined window upon her garden. She set flowers in a vase on the imagined table. She so fully occupied this state that her cramped little room ceased to be her home in feeling. Within a year, through a chain of events she could never have devised, she was given a house by a relative who had not spoken to her in years. The relative claimed that she had been on his mind continually until he felt compelled to offer her the gift. But what moved him was not accident. It was her state, invisibly working through the avenues of the world to clothe itself in fact. We are told, "To him that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance, but from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath." This is not a cruel decree, but a statement of law. To him that hath, to him that dwells in the state of already having, the outer facts will multiply in likeness to the state. But from him that hath not, from him who dwells in the state of lack, the little he possesses will vanish, for the state of lack can produce nothing but more lack. You cannot rise above the facts while dwelling in the feeling of being bound by them. But change the state, and the facts must follow, for they have no life of their own. Do not concern yourself with how the fact will come to be. The state contains within itself all the means necessary to bring it forth. The seed knows how to draw the elements it needs from the soil, the air, and the rain. It knows how to split the earth and reach toward the sun. You need not instruct it, only plant it and protect it. When you assume the state and persist in it, the outer world reorganizes itself to reflect the inner condition. This reorganization may take the form of people, events, or circumstances that you could never have foreseen. Yet, when they appear, they will seem the most natural things in the world, as though they had always been on their way to you. Let your prayer, therefore, be not a request, but an acceptance. Do not beg for what you already are in consciousness. To pray successfully is to enter the state and remain there. You pray best when you do not leave the prayer behind as a moment's wish, but carry it with you as the atmosphere in which you live. Then, even in the face of contradiction, you are unmoved, for you know that the contradiction is but the shadow of a fading state, soon to be replaced by the fact of the new. A merchant once told me how, during a season of poor trade, he resolved not to join his fellows in their lament. Instead, he daily closed his eyes to the empty shop floor and opened them inwardly to a scene of bustling customers, ringing tills, and full shelves. He lived more in that unseen shop than in the one his eyes beheld. In a matter of weeks, a large order arrived from an unexpected client, followed by a stream of regular business. The outer fact could only mirror the inner state. This is the law. The state precedes the fact. To wait for the fact to change before assuming the new state is to wait forever. The world will not give you what you do not first claim in consciousness, but claim it inwardly, and you set in motion a chain of events that no power in the world can resist. Faith is not a thing you exercise in the moment of convenience. It is the constant atmosphere in which you dwell. It is not an act you perform once to see if it works, but the very air you breathe, the inner climate in which you move. Without faith, you cannot please the one who is your own I am, for without it, you do not even touch the unseen reality in which all treasures dwell. Faith is the seeing of the invisible, the certainty of that which is not yet confirmed by your senses. It is holding to the unseen as though it were already the only fact, and refusing all seduction of doubt. When I speak of the act of faith, I do not mean the mere utterance of words or the mechanical repetition of affirmations without the life of feeling. Faith is not the parrot that repeats what it does not know. Faith is the lion that rests in the certainty of what it has already claimed. To sustain faith is to sustain the feeling that the thing you desire is already yours, though the evidence of your outer world may insist otherwise. It is here that most falter, not in knowing the principle, but in standing steadfast when the winds of contrary evidence blow. You may imagine yourself wealthy, free, and in possession of your desire tonight, but when the morning brings a letter of debt, or a merchant refuses your credit, or your business shows no increase, you abandon the inner vision for the outer report. You then imagine according to the evidence of your senses, and thus sow the seeds of lack again. You are told, let the weak say, I am strong. Not, let the weak hope they may be strong someday, but to declare, to feel, to assume strength now, in the very hour of weakness. That is the act of faith, to persist in the assumption that contradicts your senses until your senses yield to the assumption. This is not self-deception, it is the only true vision, for the outer world is but the shadow of the inner state, and the shadow cannot precede the substance. Consider the farmer. He places a seed into the earth and covers it. Day after day, he waters it, tills the soil, and protects it from weeds. If he were to dig it up daily to see if it had sprouted, he would destroy it. He rests in the assurance that the seed is doing its work unseen, and that in its own appointed season, the green shoot will appear. Faith is exactly this, resting in the unseen process, refusing to dig up your seed of assumption by looking for instant proof in the outer. There is a story told of a merchant who, in a time of great economic depression, kept his shop open when all others in his street closed theirs. His shelves were nearly bare, his customers few, and his creditors impatient. Yet, every morning he swept his floor, lit his lamps, and set his goods in the window as though expecting the busiest day of his life. When asked why he did not close, he replied, "I conduct my affairs as one whose prosperity is already established." Within months, unexpected orders from distant buyers came, and his store was filled again. His outer actions were simply the natural outflow of his inner state. He lived in the faith that his business was flourishing, and the outer world conformed. Faith cannot be measured by how you feel when everything is going well. It is measured by what you hold to when every outer sign points to failure. That is why it is said, "We walk by faith, not by sight." For sight will often show you the very opposite of what you seek, and only faith will keep your hands steady until the unseen becomes the seen. Imagine, for example, one who desires freedom from debt. If he pays his bills in the consciousness of lack, counting every coin with anxiety, dreading the next statement, he is planting seeds of more lack. But if he writes his checks, settles his accounts, and even blesses the creditors in the quiet certainty that he is the possessor of abundance, he acts in faith. The act is outwardly the same, payment, but inwardly it springs from a wholly different state and thus produces a wholly different harvest. The sustaining of the wish fulfilled is not accomplished by constant effort in imagination alone, but by a quiet resting in its truth, allowing it to become so natural to you that you no longer strain to keep it alive. When you assume wealth, for example, there will come a point where you cease to think of wealth as a distant hope. You simply think from it, live from it, and respond to life from it. This is the mature faith, no longer fragile and needing constant reassurance, but rooted deep and unshakable. Do you recall the account of Peter walking on the water? While he kept his eyes on the Master, on the state he desired, he walked above the waves. But when he considered the wind and the storm, he began to sink. The storm did not become stronger in that instant, only his attention shifted, and with it, his inner state. So it is with you. Your storm may be unpaid bills, a failing business, an empty purse. While you look to the state already fulfilled, these cannot harm you. But when you turn to regard them as fact, you sink into their reality. Faith is keeping your gaze fixed upon the promise, not the circumstance. The act of faith may seem at first like a battle, for the senses cry out for recognition. Yet as you persist, you will find it becomes ease itself, for the more you live from your desired state, the more natural it becomes. At last you no longer do faith. It is simply who you are. When you retire at night, the act of faith is to feel yourself already in possession of your desire, to drift into sleep wearing the mood of the fulfilled wish. You may find, upon waking, that your outer world still speaks the old language of lack. Pay it no mind. Return in thought to your fulfilled state, and move through your day from that inner reality. The outer must bend. It has no choice, for it is the servant of the inner man. I tell you truly, nothing in all the world can prevent the harvest of a sustained assumption held in the spirit of faith. Outer facts, no matter how oppressive, are but passing shadows. Your faith is the root, the seed, the life. Hold it, and in due season you shall see the substance appear. The measure you give is the measure that returns to you. It is an immutable law woven into the very fabric of existence, as sure and precise as the rising and setting of the sun. Every thought, every word, every act is a seed cast into the field of consciousness, and the field returns its harvest according to the quality and abundance of what was sown. If you measure with a tight and sparing hand, your return will be cramped and narrow. If you measure with a hand overflowing, the abundance will rush back to you in ways beyond your ability to calculate. This law operates in silence, without partiality and without pause. It observes not the face of man, nor his titles, nor his supposed worthiness, but only the measure of his giving. And by giving, I do not speak solely of the passing of coins or possessions, but of the very substance of the heart. To give in generous measure is to pour forth freely of your belief, your faith, your imagination, your love, and your resources, knowing that you cannot impoverish yourself by the act. There is no depletion in giving, there is only the expansion of the channel through which life flows. Consider the river that flows strongly through a wide channel. It moves with a freedom and fullness that carries freshness to all in its path. Now imagine damming that river, narrowing its course to a trickle, fearing the loss of its water. The moment you confine it, it begins to stagnate, its vitality diminishes, and the very life it sustained is choked off. So it is with the life within you. Measure out your thoughts in meager portions, and your world will shrink to match that measure. But let the measure of your inner giving be abundant, rich in belief, overflowing in the assumption of good, and your world will press upon you with overflowing blessings. There was once a merchant in an ancient city who, when weighing out grain for his customers, would always let the scales tip a little extra in their favor. People asked him why he did this, for surely over time he was losing profit. He would smile and say, "It is no loss to give more than I am paid for. The grain finds its way back to me in greater measure," and indeed, his business flourished while others struggled. For when you measure generously, you are not merely giving away matter, you are setting in motion a spiritual equation that cannot fail to return multiplied. Generous measure begins in the unseen. If a man outwardly gives much but inwardly resents it, his measure is small, he has sown grudgingly, and his harvest will reflect it. Likewise, one may appear to give little, but inwardly give with such fullness of spirit that the gift becomes infinite in its effect. The widow who cast 2 small coins into the temple treasury gave more than the wealthy who poured in large sums, for her measure was of the heart, and the heart's measure is the true standard of the law. When you understand that life mirrors back to you the measure of your own inner state, you become attentive to what you are giving in thought. If your thoughts toward others are begrudging, critical, or envious, you have already diminished your measure and thus your return. But when you deliberately assume an attitude of lavish blessing toward all you meet, seeing them as prosperous, happy, and fulfilled, you have measured out abundance, and it will return to you pressed down, shaken together, and running over. A man once told the story of his early struggles. He worked long hours, yet remained in debt, and bitterness began to creep into his heart. One day he overheard a phrase in the marketplace, "The measure you give will be the measure you get." It struck him not as a moral warning, but as a mathematical certainty. He decided to test it. Each day he began to silently bless those who passed him, imagining them receiving the good they desired. He tipped generously, gave his time freely, and sought ways to add value beyond what was expected. In months, his circumstances transformed. Contracts flowed in, debts vanished, and opportunities came to him unasked. He had expanded his measure, and the law responded in kind. The mind that hoards is a mind that distrusts the source. It believes that supply is limited, that to give is to diminish, and that others' gain is one's loss. This belief constricts the channel through which life flows. Yet the mind that gives, in thought, in word, in deed, demonstrates trust in the infinite nature of supply. It knows that the source is not a reservoir that can run dry, but a spring that rises anew with every act of giving. When you think generously, you feel expansive. When you feel expansive, you create conditions for abundance to manifest. Imagine planting a single seed and expecting an entire field to grow. That is what happens when your measure is small. The soil may be rich, the conditions perfect, but you have given it too little to multiply. But scatter many seeds without counting or clutching them, and you invite a harvest that will astonish you. Your measure is the scattering, the harvest is inevitable. Do not confuse generous measure with recklessness or the squandering of resources. Generosity is not born of desperation, or the need to impress, but of an inner recognition that you are inseparably connected to the source of all supply. When a man acts from this knowing, even his smallest gifts carry the vibration of abundance, and that vibration returns multiplied. There is a passage in ancient writings that speaks of those who sow sparingly and those who sow bountifully. The one who sows sparingly reaps sparingly. The one who sows bountifully reaps bountifully. This is not poetic sentiment, but the precise description of a law that governs the unseen as surely as gravity governs the seen. If your thoughts are generous, your acts will be generous, and the field of life will return your measure accordingly. Let us take a moment to examine this law in the realm of imagination, for it is here that the measure is truly determined. When you imagine, do you do so with constraint, allowing doubt to nip at the edges of your vision? Or do you give yourself fully to the scene, letting it expand in color, depth, and feeling until it is as real to you as your present surroundings? The measure of belief you invest in that imagined state determines the measure of its manifestation. A half-hearted imagining produces a half-hearted result. An imagining drenched in conviction and joy produces results in overflowing abundance. A young woman once desired to start her own business, but was bound by fear of failure. She imagined herself running the business, but in her vision, she always saw it as small, barely sustaining itself. Her measure was timid. One day she decided to alter her measure. In her mind, she began to see her business thriving, her products in demand, her customers delighted. She imagined herself expanding, hiring staff, opening new locations. The change in her inner measure altered the action she took, the opportunities she saw, and the confidence she projected. Within 2 years, the reality matched the abundant measure she had imagined. This law is impartial. It does not ask whether you are worthy, it only reflects your measure. If you measure out worry, fear, and lack in abundant portions, life will return those in abundant form. If you measure out joy, faith, and generosity, life will return these in overflowing measure. Your measure is the mold into which life pours itself. Change the mold, and you change the form. The beauty of this law is that it invites you to live in a continual state of generosity, not merely in money, but in attention, kindness, imagination, and praise. To measure generously is to refuse to limit the good you see for yourself and others. It is to look upon the world and declare it full, not empty, abundant, not scarce. As you persist in this generous measure, you will find the world rising to match your inner state, often in ways that surpass your initial vision. To give in generous measure is to align yourself with the rhythm of life itself. The tide comes in and the tide goes out, but it never fails to return. The tree gives fruit and the fruit bears seeds, which produce more trees. The rain falls and the rivers swell, only to rise again as clouds. In every corner of creation, the law of generous measure is enacted without resistance. Only man resists, and in his resistance, he experiences lack. Yet the moment he yields, measuring out with a full hand and an open heart, the flow resumes, and life pours back to him what he has measured out, and more. There is a secret treasury that lies not beyond the reach of men, but within the sanctuary of your own consciousness. The laws that govern your money, your wealth, and your abundance are not distant edicts imposed by fate or fortune. They are the divine principles woven into the very fabric of your being. To master these laws is to master your own reality. For you are the I Am, the living source from which all creation flows. You have seen that wealth begins in the unseen, in the fertile ground of imagination, where the seed of desire is planted and nurtured. It is there, in the vivid and faithful assumption of the wish fulfilled, that you claim possession of all that you seek. The outer world is but a mirror, reflecting the state you inhabit within. When you dwell in the consciousness of abundance, when you measure generously and hold steadfast faith, the external form must yield to your inner decree. Walk forth knowing that your consciousness is the only power that creates and sustains your fortunes. The silver and the gold belong to you, because you are the Lord of hosts in your own world. In the quiet moments before sleep, in the steady faith you carry through the day, you act in harmony with the eternal law that no man, no circumstance, and no limitation can overturn. Hold fast to this truth: the riches of the earth and the heavens are already yours. Live as though they are, and you shall find yourself surrounded by the manifestation of your inner world. For what you imagine and feel with conviction is your undisputed possession, and it waits only for your recognition to become flesh and substance. Claim your kingdom within, and the outer realm will bow before you. The treasure is yours, not someday, but now. You are the owner of all riches, the maker of your destiny, the master of the divine laws that govern money. Enter this truth, live it fully, and watch as the world unfolds in perfect response to the power that is already yours.